Welcome everyone to the Hope is Real Depression Grand Challenge. And this will be a very informative discussion with a very accomplished group of ladies that you see on my right, all from the mental health field. I'm Maggie Hirschberg. I'm the current president of Women Philanthropy. My personal interest on campus is the pancreas, the pancreatic center, and patients and treatment. This event tonight is a combined effort between Women in Philanthropy and the UCLA Depression Grand Challenge group. Information about both of us is on your seat, so whatever we don't tell you, you can read about. A few words about Women in Philanthropy. It's a wonderful group of women. We celebrate each other. The group was started about 20 years ago. Not 20 years, it's almost 21 years ago by a handful of ladies. I think, Merle, are you one of the originals? Yeah. There you go. And anybody else? B is here, and today we are 2 of 1,600, so that's a pretty good. Okay. The extraordinary women that are part of this group have roles on many areas of the campus, advisory leadership roles for the UCLA Foundation, and literally we're in every nook and cranny, bringing our business experience, our wisdom, and hopefully good choice making. I'm very excited about this program tonight. It will be very enlightening to all of us. We are going to learn about the phenomenal efforts being taken by those involved in UCLA's second Grand Challenge on depression to address many aspects of this debilitating disorder. We all know what this depression is. It has touched each and every one of us, but its basis is not yet understood, and as a result, it cannot be treated properly. The UCLA Depression Grand Challenge is aimed at understanding depression and all of its forms so that the suffering can be eliminated. And I'm the lucky person that gets to introduce Kelsey Martin, who is the moderator for this evening's presentation. Dr. Martin will be sharing all the information you need. Questions and answers will follow the sessions. So about you. Kelsey received her BA in English and American Literature and Language from Harvard University, which is that's very unusual for where you are today. Okay, she then spent 2.5 years as a Peace Corps volunteer, of which I'm so incredibly jealous, leading health prevention efforts in remote villages in the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially inspired by her experience in preventing infectious disease through vaccination programs. She enrolled in an MD, PhD program at Yale University. So we have Harvard, we have Yale, where she studied molecular biophysics and biochemistry. Dr. Martin joined the UCLA faculty in 1999 as professor in the Department of Biological Chemistry and Department Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Throughout Dr. Martin's career at UCLA, she has specialized in understanding how the brain stores memories. This work led to her integral role in the Grand Depression Challenge. What was very exciting this past August is when Dr. Martin was announced as interim Dean of the David Geffen School of Medicine. I'd like to say that she is the first woman in this position. I think we gave you a warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Augie. And I have to say, turn on my microphone here, that one of the best parts of being the interim dean of the School of Medicine is I get to see Augie. Not frequently enough, but I get to see her more than I used to. And I just want to say how grateful we are at the School of Medicine for everything that you do. So today I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing the panelists here. And first is Michelle Krask, who's a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and in the Department of Psychology. And she's director of the Center for Anxiety and Depression Research. And then Carrie Bearden, who's a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences, in the Department of Psychology, and at the Brain Research Institute. And she's the Joanne and George Miller Family Endowed Term Chair. And then our third speaker is Eliza Congdon, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and a member of the UCLA Center for Neurobehavioral Genetics. So I want to just start by telling you a little bit about the history of the Depression Grand Challenge, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to tell you more about some of the specifics. And so the Depression Grand Challenge really grew out of a calling from the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research here at UCLA. And it was a calling that I think was partly spearheaded by the Centennial Campaign, or that really... Yeah, sure. So how's that? Okay. And I'll even bring it a little bit closer to the middle there. So the idea of a grand challenge was really to try to bring together the entire scholarly community at UCLA to try to tackle an ambitious, audacious, but achievable goal, and to do it in a way that really required collaboration across all of the different units on campus. And so it was over 3 years ago now that Michelle Popowitz, who's one of the blue-haired ladies sitting sort of in the back over here, Blue for Hope, called me up and also called one of my colleagues, Larry Zapersky. And at that time, they knew, because there was a UCLA alum who worked in the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. We knew that President Obama was going to be announcing a brain grand challenge. And this is really a great time to be working on the brain, because we have amazing technologies now to really understand how the brain works. And so Michelle called us up and said, we'd like to put together a brain grand challenge. We'd like you to call some of your colleagues together. And we spent, I think it was 2 or 3 hours in Murphy Hall in a conference room, sort of tasked with trying to think about something that we could do together that would really have an impact on society. And it's very different. We generally, as scientists and as faculty, we like to think about what can we do that's going to advance our careers, what can we do that we know we'll get funding for. And we were here asked to basically do something that was creative and ambitious and impactful. And it was I found it very inspiring, because the faculty just got totally engaged, and in a way that I've never seen before. And that led to about a 6-month period where we explored a variety of different types of approaches. What is a memory was one of them. How does the brain work was another one. And one of them was about the brain and the environment. And that one sort of morphed into what is now the Depression Grand Challenge. And the reason that we ended up focusing on the Depression Grand Challenge is because we realized that, first of all, depression is one of the major causes of disability worldwide. It affects every aspect of human life. It affects every aspect of clinical medicine. And we just don't really understand what the basis of depression is. I know when I went to medical school, I was really struck by the fact that you go and you do a cardiology clerkship, You learn about how the heart works, and then you learn about how the heart doesn't work, and then you learn about how to take care of the heart. And then you go to your psychiatry clerkship, and you just don't understand the basis of most any psychiatric illnesses. And so it's very hard to devise good therapies. So, so we have all the tools to begin to understand this. There's not very much funding for depression research. It's something that has an enormous economic burden. In the United States alone, it's estimated that there's a cost of about $200 billion a year in lost productivity resulting from depression. It's a huge cause of disability on campuses, and we're a university, so we have a responsibility towards our students. Depression leads to a loss in decreased academic performance. It's also the major cause of death in college-age students, more common than car accidents, more common than natural disasters or than murder. In the military alone, in recent years, suicide is a more frequent cause of death than combat. It's something that we have a responsibility to really do something about. It's also an area that affects women more than it affects men. So at least I think probably for the four of us, that was somewhat motivating. It has a huge impact on outcomes of other illnesses. And it is something that we saw as scholars required not just one discipline. In fact, it didn't just require neuroscience or psychiatry to solve. It really required sort of the university village to be able to solve. So we realized this was something where we could bring in people with expertise in economics and business to try to understand how we can lessen the loss of productivity. We could bring in people from the social sciences to try to understand how environment affects depression and the development and the progression of development of depression. We could bring in people from the humanities to help us tell stories about depression, because of course one of the major problems that we face is that there's enormous stigma around depression. So if anybody here remembers, decades ago that cancer was something that nobody spoke about. It was something that was quite shameful, and that really meant that it was quite difficult to get treatment. And so we feel that it's important to begin a discussion about depression so that people can at least be identified and that people can seek out treatment. And so, as a grand challenge, it really fit the bill as something that was ambitious, that something that could have a major social impact, and something that brought together scholars really from across the campus and all units of the campus, and something that we felt that we could really connect with our community to try to solve. So these are all very ambitious goals, and I told you that this all started over 3 years ago. And in the meantime, there's been a tremendous amount of work to try to operationalize these. So you can start out with this big idealistic mission, but to get there, we have to then break it down into really specific components and ways of sort of solving some of these major questions that we have. And so what I want to do now is I sort of want to turn it over to my colleagues to begin to ask them about some of these initial steps, to give a little bit more detail about how we're progressing. And I'm going to start actually with you, Michelle. And you're one of the members of the executive committee of the Depression Grand Challenge. And so I want to just ask you if you can just briefly describe how the team is approaching this really ambitious goal.
I certainly can. Is this audible? You're good. Yes, so this is definitely an ambitious goal. This is an amazing effort. Over the past year, the executive committee has been working with over 100 faculty to put this together. We have designed 4 interrelated components. So the first component, we call it the 100K patient study. And in this, we will study 100,000 individuals from the UCLA healthcare system as well as the campus in order to really understand the biological, behavioral, cognitive, social, and environmental factors that contribute to depression. The second component is called the Innovative Treatment Center, where we will be implementing state-of-the-art monitoring and treatment protocols and vigorously and rigorously monitoring the impact that they have. The third component is called the Discovery Neuroscience component, which is where the basic scientists will study the molecular, the cellular, the circuit bases of depression in ways that will then inform the human studies. And the fourth component is the destigmatizing component, in which we will globally work to understand and minimize the stigma associated with depression, and we'll do that through a variety of communication channels such as public outreach and education. An investigation of this scale with this type of interdisciplinary focus, we don't think exists anywhere else in the world. And yet depression needs this kind of scale and this kind of focus in order to really have an impact. So it's truly remarkable. And I actually feel exceedingly proud to just be part of the UCLA team that has taken this on.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the 100K patient study and the Innovative Treatment Center?
Certainly. So yes, we plan to screen all members of the UCLA healthcare system, as well as many faculty, staff, and students as we possibly can using state-of-the-art screening in order to enroll 100,000 individuals. I mean, that alone is pretty remarkable. Now, these individuals will then be studied and monitored over a prolonged period of time, up to years, so that we can understand every facet of depression, from the genetic component to the brain to behavior and their interaction with early life adversity and with chronic strain and stress. We aim to achieve a breadth and depth of understanding of the different types of depression, because it's not just one condition. And then from that understanding, we can develop new and better treatments. Now, the student population is particularly important in this regard because adolescence is a critical window of time for the onset, the very first onset of depression. And as Kelsey mentioned, particularly for women, in whom the rates of depression are almost double the rates for men. And so one of the aims of the Depression Grand Challenge will be to unravel the mystery around why is it that women are so much more at risk than men. And then with respect to the treatment, so we clearly will be identifying a number of individuals who will be in need of treatment out of that 100,000. And so we're proposing what's called the Innovative Treatment Center, in which we'll implement state-of-the-art existing treatments to start off with, using what we call a tiered treatment approach. Now, the tiered model, and I'll explain it, is actually an emerging paradigm that we think will be a wonderful model for other places around the country and even around the world, where treatment needs far exceed the resources that are available. Even on campus, we are brimming over and don't have enough resources currently available. So within this tiered model, those individuals who are at risk for depression or are mildly depressed will be provided an internet-based self-guided treatment which has already been shown to be effective in a number of studies, with the support of careful monitoring that I'll describe. Individuals who are moderately depressed will also receive this internet-based treatment, but facilitated by one-to-one contact with highly trained and supervised graduate students who are part of the Depression Grand Challenge team. And then the severely depressed individuals, they will be the ones who will receive care from licensed clinical professionals across psychiatry, psychology, neurology, and social work. Now, a very unique aspect of this treatment model is that we will be incorporating with the treatment 24/7 ongoing monitoring of daily functioning using smartphone technology. So we will be recording features that are really critical markers of depression, such as social interaction, overall activity levels, sleep, basic physiology, and also, of course, we'll be interacting with people through this smartphone technology to have ongoing recording of their symptoms. And this daily monitoring of function will then guide treatment delivery. So imagine somebody who's in the lowest tier of treatment, they're in the self-guided program, and suddenly they start to withdraw. They're not interacting, they're isolating, they're sleeping excessively. That would be a target or a flag for us to say, oh, okay, maybe this person needs to be shifted into a more intensive program. Or let's say somebody's finished an intensive round of treatment, done very well, and 6 months later we're starting to see early signs of relapse. That might be a flag to reinitiate treatment. So we're really excited by this integration of the monitoring with the treatment, because we think what it will do is it will personalize the treatment to the needs of the individual in a way that will surely improve the outcomes. And then finally, as the science evolves through the Depression Grand Challenge, we of course expect to develop new novel treatments that are informed by the science, such that we can then deliver a treatment that's specifically targeted to what a given individual most needs. And that level of precision will advance the field greatly.
So this sounds great, but I keep thinking about 100,000 people. How do you get to 100,000 people?
Yeah, so that is a really excellent question, and so I'd like to address that a little bit, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot in the context of my project. So this is actually what I've been working on for my pilot project, which is called a framework to establish, develop large-scale screening and investigation of mood disorder risk in the UCLA community. And this project was really selected as a pilot so we could really develop the methodology in order to move up to the next level of this 100,000 person study. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So as you just heard from Kelsey and from Michelle, this goal of assessing 100,000 people is really visionary. This is really not something that's ever been done at another campus. And it really requires us to start thinking about the way we assess mood disorder in a completely different way. And so to do this, we're going to use a pretty novel methodology. It's called computerized adaptive testing. And this is a method that we can implement in large samples at relatively low cost. Essentially, what we're doing, without going into a lot of detail about the method, is we're taking information, we're taking from a very large item pool, we're taking the information from what a person responded to a previous question and using that information to inform what the next question is the person is going to receive. And so, for example, if someone answers yes to the question of, do you feel depressed every day, more days than not, then the chances they're going to answer the next question, do you feel sad, similarly is pretty high. And so we can really try to use that information to get better precision on these questions and not ask people a million questions. And so this is something that actually has already been shown to be very effective in making a clinical diagnosis of clinically significant depression with only about 6 questions. So it takes less than a minute. And so what we're going to do is expand this technology to assess people that are at risk for mood disorder that haven't yet developed a full-blown mood disorder. My interest is really in developmental psychopathology and really in capturing those individuals who are at risk that haven't yet developed a full-blown illness. And that way we can really try to give them feedback and hopefully change that trajectory. So that's one of the things that I'm really, really excited about with this project. And The other component, which Michelle already talked about a little bit, is that for those people who are at risk, we'll be able to follow them longitudinally using this smartphone technology. And there's really amazing new technology being developed here that we're really going to try and harness for this project. And so the hypothesis is that for people, we're tracking them and we start to see increasing signs of sleep disruption and perhaps reduction in social contacts, so reduced number of calls, reduced number of times people are leaving the house. Now, this is really a warning sign that may indicate someone's at risk for an impending mood episode. And so these are the kinds of things that we'll be working on developing this technology over the next couple of years in order to really track these symptoms. So it's quite amazing the information you can get without even asking people a single question. Of course, we'll also ask people questions about their mood, activity, and things like substance abuse, which is also a really important risk factor, we think. And so we're planning to eventually to implement this screening throughout the entire campus and the health system. And so our project is really going to lay that foundation for this larger 100,000 person study. And as part of this effort, one of the things that I think is also really important is we really want to partner with the people that are participating in this pilot phase of the study to really better understand what are the things that you all think are important to study and to look at. We really don't want to be missing things. And so I really look forward to your questions and further discussion.
So Carrie's project, when she said it was a pilot project, one of the steps that we took at the medical school this year was to fund a number of pilot or demonstration projects. So we put out a request for proposals across the campus, and the response was incredibly encouraging. I think we got about 80 applications from 120-something different faculty from 22 different departments across the campus, many different schools. And they all proposed sort of creative, novel approaches to being able to understand and treat depression. They range from very basic science to translational and clinical studies. And so Carrie's talking about one of these projects. And another project is one that Eliza is the head of. And so I want to have you tell us a little bit about your pilot project.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Just check volume. You can hear me? Okay. So part of the motivation behind the Depression Grand Challenge is the recognition that current treatments are inadequate for a large proportion of patients suffering from depression. And as many of you may know, a major contributor to the burden of the disease is that lengthy trial and error period between starting a treatment and having symptoms improved. Specifically, antidepressants require weeks to months before most patients see an improvement in symptoms, and many patients have to try multiple treatments before they find a good match, which means their symptoms are improved and the side effects aren't too unbearable. But even so, many patients fail to find adequate symptom relief, or they're left managing burdensome side effects. So for this reason, our group studies fast-acting treatments, and that includes electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, low-dose ketamine infusion, as well as overnight sleep deprivation. And although these are not optimal long-term treatments for depression, they're very useful in research because each results in a rapid and robust antidepressant response. So while maybe 30% of patients will respond to a given antidepressant, at least 60% of patients respond to these treatments, and they do so in a matter of hours to days as opposed to weeks to months. So what our research project aims to do with support from the Depression Grand Challenge is systematically and comprehensively assess patients before, during, and after receiving one of these treatments. And what we'll do is we will repeatedly assess cognition, brain structure and function, as well as genomic and immune system activity, as we also are tracking changes in mood and depressive symptoms. And so our goal in combining these fast-acting treatments with these detailed assessments is twofold. The first is that once we understand how these fast-acting treatments work to alter neurobiological activity that brings about improvement in symptoms, we can then use this knowledge to stimulate the development of novel antidepressant therapies that can be used in a wider range of patients, not just those severely treatment-resistant depressed patients. And the second is once we understand how these neurobiological changes bring about improvements in symptoms, the sooner we can begin to use biomarkers to predict who is more likely to respond to a given treatment, similar to what Michelle was talking about before with personalizing treatment. So often this problem is thought of as throwing a dart at a dartboard while being blindfolded, and what we're trying to do is remove that blindfold so we can hopefully eliminate this lengthy and burdensome trial and error treatment selection process.
So, Kelsey, we've covered the patient study and treatment, and you are the discovery neuroscience expert on the panel. So would you mind sharing with us some of the basic cutting-edge research that is currently informing the topic of depression?
So I'll give you one example, and it's, it actually, I want to sort of pick up on something that Eliza said, because listening to her, what's really, inspiring to me is this idea that there are these treatments like ketamine or ECT that actually work, but they have a lot of they actually don't have that many side effects, but they're not ideal. I think many of us would not want to have the people we care about have some of these treatments. And so I think by having projects where we're trying to understand really what is it about those treatments that works, we can narrow down and really get a very specific, targeted, effective therapy. And so the project I want to tell you about that's a basic science project is a project that's conducted by David Krantz, who's a psychiatrist, physician, scientist. And he works in fruit flies. And fruit flies are this wonderful model organism because we can, because of all the tools that have been developed, we can really start to probe what's the effect of genes on behavior in that animal. And they actually share a lot of genes with humans. So we can learn a lot about human behavior by studying fruit flies. And so we all know that a lot of very popular antidepressants like Prozac and other serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they work by targeting what are called, I'm just going to hold it like this just to make it easier for everybody in the room. So they all target what are called neuromodulatory neurotransmitters or catecholamines, things like serotonin and dopamine. So they work. They take a long time to work. We don't understand why they take so long to work. And what's really kind of, to me, shocking is that as a basic neuroscientist, we actually don't know a lot about the cell and molecular biology of this kind of communication in the brain, about how serotonin works. We don't know a lot about how it's released, how it binds to its receptors, what it does. Pretty fundamental biology. And so one of the projects in the project that David Krantz is funded to do through the Depression Grand Challenge is to use fruit flies as a model organism where you can quite quickly and robustly understand how does neuromodulation work? How do these neurotransmitters that are such important targets for, not just depression, but many psychiatric psychotropic medications, what's their underlying biology? And so that's just an example of one of them. There are many others looking at, for example, how does estrogen levels affect inhibitory neurons in the brain, and how does that impact brain function? But that gives you sort of a taste of what these are about. So we've given you a lot of sort of details about aspects of this, and I thought that maybe now what we could do is just go around and have each of you share something about what your experience of working on the Grand Challenge has been like. So maybe we'll start with you, Carrie.
Sure. Oh, thank you. No one can hear me. So working on the Grand Challenge has just been such an incredibly exciting experience. It's really taken I'm generally a very collaborative scientist, but this has really taken the collaboration to a whole new level, working with people in economics, for example, as well as wireless health technology, and actually even outside of academia, partners in industry as well who are developing some of these novel technologies for mobile devices. And so that has been just an incredibly eye-opening experience for me, just working with people in these very different disciplines. And also just talking to people out in the community about getting others' reactions to this. I mean, that's been a really enriching experience as well.
Eliza?
Well, similar to Carrie, since joining the Depression Grand Challenge, I've had the opportunity to witness this very large group of individuals from diverse backgrounds come together and think about how to make an immediate impact in the lives of patients seeking help for their depression at UCLA. And this is in contrast to the more common experience of our more common experience where we as researchers or clinicians tend to work independently, and we think globally at the level of the population rather than at the level of the patient. At the level of the population rather than at the level of the patient. And similar to what Kelsey said at the beginning, we're highly motivated by grants and manuscripts. So what's different about the Depression Grand Challenge is everyone, and not just those researchers with expertise in depression, are coming together to tackle this problem. And we're using a research framework, as we've described, as our starting point, but our focus is not on traditional research endpoints. Our focus is on real-world outcomes. So personally, I've been very inspired by this opportunity to make an impact and potentially improve the long-term and holistic care of patients seeking help for their depression at UCLA.
Michelle?
So as we have reached out to our various colleagues around the world, and this includes the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, India, and South Africa, I have been personally, and I think we all have been really inspired by a resounding response, which is this. Number one, this is an extremely important topic. Number two, UCLA is the only place where this is likely to succeed because of its scientists, its resources, and its community. And number three, how can we be involved? And it seems that the world recognizes the need for a unified effort, and they believe in UCLA as the place to take the lead. So that's been extremely inspiring. In this room, there's probably someone who has suffered from depression at some time, or knows someone who's suffered from depression. I can say from first-hand experience, I've seen the damaging effects of depression on a loved one in my own family. And I think it means it's time for us all to come together and to actually do something about this. And the Depression Grand Challenge provides that avenue and that pathway.
All right, thank you. Well, I want to thank all of you. And what I want to do right now is open the floor up to questions from anybody, and there will be microphones that will be coming around. So if anybody has a question, if they just raise their hand, we can have a microphone, not a microscope. You can see what I spend the other part of my life doing, coming around. You can come to my lab and use microscopes too. Okay,
I have a very naive question. Could you please define depression within the context of what you are all studying? I mean, everybody gets depressed.
You know, it's a great question. It's not naive. So what's depression and what's sadness and so maybe Michelle, maybe you can take that question.
Yes, so depression, when we talk about depression, we're talking about a level of sadness or hopelessness or feelings of negative affect or guilt combined with symptoms like poor sleep, lethargy, difficulty getting up and functioning, difficulty getting through the tasks of the day, that lasts for at least 2 weeks. So it's not the I feel sad, I feel down. This is a condition that has quite disabling effects, as Kelsey mentioned early on. That's why days lost at work and disability costs are so high for this condition. Now, as I say it, I'm also wanting to recognize it's actually quite mixed. So there are a lot of different subtypes of depression that we really don't know a lot about. We certainly know there's a difference between what's called unipolar depression and bipolar depression, but even within unipolar depression, which is a type of depression that doesn't have the manic phase, there's still lots of different variations, and that's actually one of the aims of the Depression Grand Challenge, to understand all of the heterogeneity and then to match the treatment to a given individual.
Other questions? Okay, yeah.
How do you keep other universities apprised of your successes along the way so they can actually follow your leadership and they can start implementing things too?
I'm going to take a start at that, and then I'll pass it on. So one thing is, so the question is, how do we keep other universities apprised of our progress and what we're doing so that if we are successful, that they can implement some of the strategies that we've identified? So this project is, it's been given birth here at UCLA. But we really have, as I think for all of us as scholars, we have colleagues across the globe who are our colleagues with whom we collaborate. And we've already engaged in many different collaborations with these colleagues, and there's lots of communication. So I actually feel like this will be kind of a natural and a very focused and conscious part of the Depression Grand Challenge. But I know that, for example, that Michelle has actually initiated some pretty substantial collaborations with groups.
Right, and I think, again, because of the recognition of the need for a unified effort, UCLA can take the lead, but it's really going to take, multiple locations coming on board. And as I said, people want to be involved. Once they hear about it, they go, wow, that's amazing. So we contact people. We will be writing journal articles that will talk about the study. We have websites up. We're attending conventions and meetings. We've invited various foundations from different countries to come and listen to what we are proposing to do. So we're actively involved in that.
We, as part of the Depression Grand Challenge, we just recruited a really amazing faculty from Oxford University who's a leading geneticist who's actually to date done the largest study of depression in a population of Chinese women. And I know that his recruitment from Oxford to UCLA has sort of made waves across, different universities. And so that's one way that you get the news out. Other questions? Yeah.
This is for Eliza. Okay, you talked about 3 rapid response therapies that I have never heard of, and there's a lot of depression in my family. And they were ketamine and sleep deprivation, and what was the last one?
ECT.
Which is that electroshock?
It's electroconvulsive therapy, yeah.
Okay, and how do those 3 therapies work? And they also seem so different from each other.
They are, and what's really, sure. So the question was about these fast-acting therapies that might not be known to everybody. They're electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, ketamine infusion, so getting an injection of ketamine, or overnight sleep deprivation. And it's very unique. So one involves basically inducing a seizure. One involves just staying up overnight. It's a behavioral intervention. And one involves an injection of a substance. And yet what's common to all 3 is there's evidence that all 3 stimulate neurogenesis or neuroplasticity in the brain. So somehow they're working to kickstart the growth and development of new neurons. The reason why I said they're not optimal as long-term treatment solutions is because they're very short-lasting. And so that's probably why they're not familiar to many of you. With the exclusion of ECT that has been used long-term for patients with initial ECT and maintenance ECT. These treatments tend to be reserved for severely depressed and treatment-resistant patients who are in an acute state and need an intervention. So that's who we tend to use them for. But like I said, this link among these 3 with evidence from animal studies showing that they stimulate the growth of new neurons and bring about rapid improvement in symptoms. The same level of symptom improvement that you see over long-term treatment with antidepressants, you can see in a matter of hours or days. So that's why we're using them as primarily as a research model, although they are used in certain situations for treatment.
My question was partially addressed right there, but I'm hoping that your answer might give me a little better insight into what you're looking for.
how is it that you define depression in the context of the life of a fruit fly?
Yeah, so I mean, that's actually a really good question. I mean, it's a question. So I think one of the important components there is that you can break down certain traits. I mean, Michelle talked about sleep, about anhedonia, so sort of lack of pleasure, lack of motivation. Those things can actually be modeled really well in fruit flies. So fruit flies, it may be surprising to people that all of the genes, we know about all the genes that underlie circadian behaviors and that give rise to things like narcolepsy, and those have been discovered in fruit flies, and they're conserved in humans. And so, we can look at mutations that affect sleep cycle. You can model what we call appetitive behaviors, where a fruit fly will like something, they'll like a taste or an odor. And so you can model whether or not that fruit fly is motivated to go towards that lovely substance, or what it considers to be. So that's how you can do it behaviorally. But in this case, the example that I gave you of these studies of like how does serotonin work, we don't even have to model the behavior in that case. We can actually learn a lot about sort of just the really basic conserved cell biology of how these neurotransmitters are released and how they bind and what the signaling pathways are that they affect. And then you at least have sort of the beginnings of an understanding that you can then take to a human and see whether or not that's conserved. Over here. Okay.
The question I have is, it seems because of the stigma, a lot of people and families wait until there's a huge crisis to get intervention. And a lot of what you're talking about is in terms of kind of getting in earlier and dealing with it and doing these, screens to get to the 100,000 patients. And, in terms of people really truthfully filling out the surveys and even families, until it comes to a crisis, they don't even really know what depression is. So I guess my issue is, how are you going to deal with all of that?
So I actually think I'm going to turn this over if it's so. Yeah. So the question is that, and correct me if I don't get the essence of it, but people often, in a family, really wait till the very last minute. They wait till somebody's really severely depressed. They don't recognize early signs of depression.
Or the patient is hiding it.
Or the patient is hiding it. So how are we really going to get at that? How are we going to work with the families, work with the individuals to be able to pull out those early signs so that we aren't waiting until a very severe depression? So I think the person who could address that really well is Carrie Bearden, because she really works on sort of early development of mental disorders. So.
Thanks. So I think it's an excellent question. And so, I think that there's really two parts to it. And one of them is the issue of are we concerned about people responding truthfully to a screening measure, or either ignoring it or not answering truthfully. And one of the things, I think that by having a questionnaire that can be done remotely, can be done online in your dorm room, for example, I think is really going to help people, facilitate people doing this anonymously, getting feedback. And so this is one of the aspects of it that we've been working on with Michelle, is that people will get instant feedback on their responses, and it will tell you, okay, you were in a moderate risk for depression, these are the things you can do. And with suggestions like an online cognitive behavioral therapy that doesn't necessarily require going to, calling up a therapist or finding a therapist. And so, I think access to care is a really big issue. And so I think we're going to tackle it in that way, in terms of providing much easier access to care. And the other component that I think is going to be really important within the campus and within the student body is really normalizing depression. And, absolutely everybody feels sad at times. And so it's really a matter of recognizing, when is this too much? When is your stress or your, level of mood symptoms really, is starting to impair your functioning, or your grades dropping? And so one of the things we're implementing is going to be getting resiliency counselors within the student body and really training other students as peers to recognize signs of depression in other students, and really helping in a way that normalizes it, where you're not necessarily needing to go see a psychiatrist, and maybe that can be the kind of treatment that will apply for mild or moderate levels of depression. And then as things get more severe, we'll be able to really track that and say, okay, based on your responses to these questions, or based on what your activities were concerned, and think that maybe a higher level of care is needed.
If you do an early intervention, can you avoid the severe breakdown?
Yeah, and I think, if I may, that definitely. So obviously, depression, sort of an episode occurs, then there's a remission, then another episode occurs, then often there's a remission, and with each episode there can be damaging effects on academic performance, social interactional patterns, functioning in general. So the earlier you can intervene and offset that sort of growing and accumulating negative impact, the better. And one of the goals will be to do prevention for those who haven't even manifested but are at risk. And I think that would be probably the most powerful thing we could do, not just for the society but for the individual. The other thing I was going to mention, you'll notice we have our badges, which is blue for hope, and so this is a campaign that's part of the destigmatizing, to encourage people to recognize depression exists and that we are embracing and here to offer hope and help.
There's a question over here. Yep.
Well, I'm one of the 100,000 in the UCLA healthcare system that you might contact, and I don't understand. I understand the beginning, but I don't get what the middle is before you get over to the shock therapy.
Don't worry.
I'm worried. No, I don't understand. After you do the questionnaire and you find somebody is A, B, or C group, and then what happens next? Because treatment is a pretty nebulous term.
So the vision right now, and of course things are unfolding as we go, but the vision is that, let's say you came into a screening and it said, you appear to be in the range of moderate depression. Would you like some resources for treatment? So that would be the initial question. So this is all optional. If you had answered, yes, I'd be interested in learning about a treatment program, then we'd say, this is a internet-based program that has been shown to be as effective as face-to-face therapy contact for individuals with this level of depression, and here is a graduate student who will be working with you to help you go through this on a session-by-session basis, and then we'll also be monitoring you as you go through using these smartphone technologies, if you agree, so everything is by consent. And then you might go through a 6-session program, and then you'd be continuously monitored if you consented for a number of years. Does that kind of answer the question? No?
No, because I don't hear where treatment comes in.
So the self-guided internet treatment is a treatment.
Internet treatment, but not people treatment.
So the more severely depressed individuals would be receiving treatment delivered by a psychiatrist, a psychologist, licensed social worker perhaps.
Would that be free of charge?
So we're just in the moment currently working out all of these kind of issues about if it's a research program, there wouldn't be a charge. If it's a service, is there going to be reimbursement through insurance? That we haven't gotten to the details yet. That's under discussion.
Other questions? Maybe, okay. I think we'll have time to get to everybody, so.
How do you manage all the data from 100,000 patients? How many people are involved, or, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah. And can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question is, how do you manage the data from 100,000 people? And that, I think, is one of the most important questions. And again, draws upon the amazing resources and experts that we have at UCLA. So there will be basically new development of facilities to support that type of data. And we haven't even talked about the genomic data yet, which we can't really conceive of how much data that will be. But Michelle was talking earlier about there being a personal cloud that tracks the information that we're collecting through remote monitoring, in addition to the mood information that we're collecting. It will require a lot of resources, but it's definitely doable thanks to the bioinformaticians that we have at UCLA.
I think, you know, even just in terms of the actual storage space, that's a huge issue for the health system already. And there are supercomputing facilities that we're working with, and so certainly we'd be able to partner with those in terms of just the storage of the data. The analysis is another question. Okay, let's find somebody who has a microphone. Okay, right here.
Okay, ooh, that was loud. In terms of the 100,000 people, I know we've already had a few questions on that. Is everyone required to opt into this, or is it an opt-out thing? Is it all online? Is anyone going to be capturing anything in person? Is it something that's offered anytime anyone comes into a UCLA Health Center? Like, how is that going to work, and how accurate do you think that the data is going to be?
Sure. Yes. So the question for people who didn't hear is just in terms of whether this is all going to be online, or whether there's a in-person options, both for the research component as well as the treatment. And yes, absolutely. So essentially, the way we're envisioning this is that for people who complete the online screening, there'll be an option: would you like to be recontacted to continue to participate in the study? And for those people who opt in, so it would be an opt-in. Those people would then be recontacted, and then we have a set of laboratory-based assessments that would be done as part of that. So brief assessments, but for a subset of people, neuroimaging and some blood biomarkers for the genetic studies, and then this ongoing tracking of mood and activity. So those would just be for people who were interested in participating in the larger study.
When are you planning on launching? I'm just curious. When are you planning on launching this?
Yeah, well, I think we're planning it probably at this point, since we're getting close to the holidays, it'll probably be in the start of the new year.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
100,000 was 2017.
Thank you for clarifying. That'll be for the start of our pilot projects. Yeah.
I'm familiar with ECT and ketamine, but the sleep deprivation, I've never heard of that before, because every time I get depressed, I don't sleep, so maybe I cured myself. But I'm really interested in how that works and for how long you do it, and like what happens that you're finding that treats depression.
Yeah, so that one in particular is not an optimal long-term solution because the effects, the symptom improvement that's seen go away as soon as the individual goes back to sleep. So it's a very short term, but it is helpful in acute situations. So if you have a very severely depressed, suicidal individual, overnight sleep deprivation can save a life. It's also useful in a research context because rather than track an individual over months when they start taking an antidepressant and we're studying, we're trying to figure out why is it that this drug is working, and when does the symptom improvement occur, and how does that relate to brain function, and how does that relate to blood biomarkers? If we have something in such a narrow time window, we can keep them in the under observation for 36 hours, keep them awake, and make all of our assessments and try to pinpoint what neurobiological changes are underlying symptom improvement. So it is less known. It's not widely used as a treatment for that reason, that it's not long lasting.
To know, how can we as a group here assist you? I mean, we know what you do, but what can we do?
Well, thank you for that question. So there are a lot of ways, and on each of your seats, there's a little flyer or handout that has some ways that individuals can help. These include being here today, talking with people about this, A big part of this goal is about destigmatizing depression. So there actually is a lot that one can do about being open about depression, about doing what was brought up here, about being aware of it at early stages rather than sort of waiting for something, a very late acute stage. And then there are projects that people can contribute to, and these range from helping support a patient who chooses to opt in and to enroll in these studies, to helping support a fellow who will be working on one of the projects, whether it's a basic science or a translational or a clinical project. Wearing blue for hope. You don't have to dye your hair blue, but if you were so inclined, you could do so. Other ways? Any other?
Oops. Yeah, I think the most critical is to spread the word. To spread the word that this is something that we're taking on and that this is deeply in need of a concerted effort, and the more that people are talking about it and inquiring about it and willing to contribute to help this actually taking place through money or through just offering volunteer services, I think that would be the way to go.
I mean, I think about like the Framingham Heart Study, where we really have learned a lot about heart health from its very long-term study. And that's something that I think everybody's very comfortable talking about. We need to have public engagement in this as well, and that's only going to happen when people are talking about it. So, okay, there are a few other questions here. Yeah, so right here.
My question is,
Here's a microphone. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're already reaching out to colleagues at other universities. Are there going to be any parallel studies running at other universities right from the beginning as similar to yours, so that
Yeah. Well, there are other universities that have, like University of Michigan has a center for looking at depression. There are some differences. They don't really incorporate the basic science, but we've certainly reached out to them. Many of you may know about at MIT and Harvard at the Broad Institute, there have been very large-scale studies of the genetics of schizophrenia that have led to the identification of many genes that are risk factors for schizophrenia. And so we've reached out to them and are working with them on the genetic sides of this.
And I mentioned some of the countries that we've been in touch with. So Vikram Patel is a leading researcher in India, and he is putting us in touch with the World Bank meeting in June, where there is a large focus on depression, and he's encouraging us to develop a protocol that he can then implement in India, which would exactly replicate and therefore add to what we're doing at UCLA. So now we're going grander. It's not just grand, it's the grander depression challenge.
thank you.
Yes, back here.
I'd like to understand what your protocol is for confidentiality for the people that are applying for this program, because having worked in a professional environment and dealing with depression myself, I most certainly would not want anyone to know that I'm dealing with that type of challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Everybody heard about confidentiality, and we're very aware of the need and importance of confidentiality, and have been, I would say we're at the moment working on that issue to make sure that there's maintenance of the safety of the records. So I don't have any specific answers to you other than to say we're very aware of that, and we're doing everything to work on that so that it's every bit of material would be kept confidential.
If you're a student or a staff member,
Yeah.
or if you're going to be using your own personal computer to be getting services online with regard to mental health, if you don't have a portal that's secure.
Yeah, so we're fortunate in that the engineering department and Bill Kaiser, as the professor there, have already developed these confidential systems, and I'm not sufficiently capable of knowing how to describe it, but he's assuring us that that is possible. I don't know if, yeah.
And I would say that, one of the first things that I've been confronted with in my job as the interim dean of the medical school are issues about electronic medical records and safety. And it's going to be secure. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you mean whether it will be de-identified? It will have to be de-identified, but with codes so that we can contact the people, because this is a longitudinal study.
It will be. One other quick point I want to make about that is, at least for our pilot project, we're going to be looking at people from all parts of the continuum. So we'll also be looking at people who are not experiencing symptoms of depression as well. So by participating in the study, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed. But that being said, I think that the confidentiality and making sure that the data are de-identified is really critical.
So in this process of reaching out to 100,000 people, there will be respondents who have been diagnosed as clinically depressed, who are taking antidepressants, are functional to some extent because they are, but they clearly still have issues. How do those people play into this study? How are they quote, treated and studied?
Did everybody hear the question? So people who are already currently in treatment. So when we offer treatment, it will be, would you be interested in treatment? And so it will be an individual choice. If they're satisfied with what they are receiving, even if they are still symptomatic or still experiencing depressed mood, then they may choose to add on what we're doing or stay with what they have. So that will be an individual choice. There will be no sort of policy about having to end what they're currently taking.
How do we start to study what's working with those treatments and what isn't? To some extent, you discussed that with group life.
Yeah.
But how do we start getting at the mechanism, physiological?
The question is, how do we start to get at the mechanism? So every treatment that we implement within the Depression Grand Challenge will be studied extensively in order to identify the mechanisms. That's exactly Eliza's project, trying to understand how do these work and for whom do they work, and eventually we'll be then testing out which treatment through randomized control trials works best for whom. So there'll be close analysis of that.
Yeah, so we're going to end here, but we're going to be around for a while. We're happy to take questions from any of you.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our panel, enlightening and wonderful, and drive safe.